Hey y'all, how's it going? Today we're coming out here to have one sip with you, changing the world one sip at a time. It's been a while since I've done kind of a video really rooted in the Word, but yesterday I was out here. I'm at my orchard part of my farm, and I was out here with our moose man, with Timothy, and while we were out here, I started getting into the Word with him. Because we're talking about this orchard. And so today we're going to change the world one sip at a time. So I've got my coffee here, and I've got a word for you today. I'm excited to bring it because, man, it's just good stuff. It's one of my favorite parables. So I'm going to have my sip. Oh, man, so good. And then we're going to get straight into the word with you. And so today I want to show you it's one of my favorite parables, and it's John chapter 15. So here we go. John chapter 15. This parable, it's called the parable of the vine and the branches. You've probably heard of it before if you're someone who goes to church very often and stuff. But look at this with me, all right? And after we look at this, I'm actually going to go closer to these trees. I want to show you what this is talking about. So here we go. It's the parable of the vine and the branches, John chapter 15. It says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full." Man, I just love that this parable. It's such an awesome picture. The parable here it's a parable of a vine, which really it's talking about grapes. And I actually do have a couple of grapevines, but they're brand new, and so they're not a very good illustration to use with you this morning. But I have an orchard, and you see in grapes, in trees like apple trees, and in pear trees, and in peach trees, if you go and you buy a plant from the store, you're going to go and you're going to buy, let's say, my favorite apple is the Fuji. And so if I want to go buy a Fuji apple or a Fuji apple tree, I can go to the store and I can buy a Fuji apple tree. And it's going to produce Fuji apples on that tree. It's pretty awesome. And the reason why it works that way is because you see what they do in culture, right? In growing fruit, is they develop a specific branch that makes a fruit that tastes a certain way, and it's in the DNA of the branch. And so what happens is that branch creates the exact same fruit every single time, because the DNA in that branch says to make a very specific fruit. But you see what happens whenever that fruit is then grown, that fruits can have a seed in it. And what's funny is a Fuji apple is not going to produce a Fuji apple tree, because that apple was actually cross-pollinated with something else. And the way that that DNA then works is it's actually going to create its own fruit. And it's going to be a fruit that's not going to taste the same as the Fuji apple tree. It might taste better and it might taste worse. But the only way you actually produce Fuji apples is if you go back to the original source. And that original source is the very first Fuji apple tree. You see, every single Fuji apple tree that's grown after that Fuji apple, that very first one, they tried, they bit into it and they said, oh my gosh, this is so sweet and it's so juicy. Now what they do from then on is, after they've decided this is the fruit that we want, they cut a branch off of that specific tree and they graft it into other new roots. And what happens is that branch grows up into a new Fuji apple tree, so that every fruit that grows off of that branch or that tree now is Fuji apples. And so I've got a couple of Fuji apple trees out here, but what I know is that every single one of those trees back there goes back to actually the very first Fuji apple that was ever made, the very original tree, because it's the only way you actually get Fuji apples. And so you always go back to the original source. And that's what Jesus is saying here. He says, I am the vine, my Father is the vine dresser. He's saying, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, my words remain in you, you will bear much fruit. And which fruit are we actually going to be producing? It's the DNA of the vine. It's the DNA of what is coming into us, which is Jesus himself. We will actually bear the exact same fruit that Jesus bore. Whenever Jesus says, I am the vine, and he says, if my words remain in you, we can actually know exactly what that means. We know the DNA of the Father. We know the DNA of Jesus. The DNA that he's talking about is actually in the same book. If we go back to the very beginning, if we go to John chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And if you go down, it goes into the prophecy and the fulfillment from John the Baptist from here. But if you go down into verse 14, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Man, so what we know is that the DNA of Jesus is specifically the Word. The Word became flesh. The DNA of Jesus is fulfilling his Father's commands. It's being obedient to his Father and his Father's commands. It's living a perfect life. That is the DNA of Jesus. And whenever we abide in him and he and his words abide in us, we begin to be literally the same as Jesus. And that's beautiful. We can know it. We can stand on it. It's what his commands are. It's what he's teaching us to do. And so here in a little bit, I'm going to actually take you back here. I'm going to show you the trees. I'm going to show you the differences between my good trees, my bad trees, and how those things work. So I know that this is kind of getting into a little bit of a longer video, but guys, I want to show you this stuff because it's really awesome the way that the Father gave us this beautiful picture, this beautiful parable, that we can know what it means to abide. So y'all check this out. All right. So here we are looking at my orchard, and it's not a very impressive orchard, but this is what I've got. And here's some of the reasons why I don't think it's a very impressive orchard, and you probably don't either. Have you ever heard when the best time to plant a tree is? It's 20 years ago. But do you know what the second best time to plant a tree is? Today. That's right. So what I've got here is I've got a handful of apple trees and I've got a couple of pear trees. And what I'm looking at and what I want to show you today is how this plant is grafted in. Just like what Jesus was talking about in the vine and the branches. So this is a newer tree that I've got. I've planted him, and I've planted him because I had a tree here that didn't make it. Lack of better words, it died. The root died. But here we go. Here's one tree, and here's a tree that's really interesting. I'm excited to show you this tree. This is my biggest apple tree. You can see there's one over there. There's this one over here. There's one right there. And then I actually just pulled one up that the root had died that was right there, right in the middle. And then I got a couple of pears back there and another apple tree. But this one right here is interesting to me because look at how big it is. It's the biggest apple tree that I have. Here's all the branches that I cut off yesterday that I pruned in order to try to encourage it to grow more. Look at this right here. This right here is where this tree was grafted in. This right here is actually the root of the original plant that's coming up. That root is grown down into the ground so that it can take all the nutrients and it can deliver it to the branch, which then becomes the apple tree. And grapes, what you have is you have your main vine, and that main vine actually grows up and carries the DNA. But right here, this spot is where this apple tree is grafted in, and it can therefore take the DNA from this tree, this Fuji apple branch that is originally a branch from the original Fuji apple tree. This guy right here can then grow up, and it can be an apple tree that produces fruit. But do you see any fruit? This is my biggest tree. It's growing beautifully. It's nice and tall. It's healthy, and it bears no fruit. As of right now, it's the most useless tree that I've got. But it's pretty. It's big, especially compared to my others. It makes shade. But I planted this so it could be an apple tree. And right now, quite frankly, it isn't. That should tell us a little bit about our own lives. Are we growing? Do we look pretty? Maybe we've got all the stuff. But if we're not bearing fruit, we aren't what the Father made us to be. I'm going to show you this other tree now. This guy right here. This is he's a yellow delicious, golden delicious apple tree. You can see how much smaller he is compared to that. But look, he bears fruit. He bears fruit. This tree is the best tree that I have. He doesn't look like he's the best tree. He doesn't have all the rest of the stuff going on. He's not the prettiest. He's not the fullest. But guess what? He's the best because he bears fruit. He's grafted in real well, and he's bearing fruit. I'm going to show you one more here. This guy right here, this was a Fuji apple tree. And look at this. This big stem that you see that's growing up right here, this guy, that is the Fuji apple tree. This guy that's growing up next to it, that's actually living, that's actually from the original root. You can see how he's actually coming straight from the root. You see my Fuji apple tree is dead. It is dead. This is going to be the branch that withers that I'm going to take off. I'm going to throw it in the fire. I'm going to burn it because that guy, he did not abide. Not even a little bit. Not only is he not growing fruit, he's not growing leaves. He is dead. Just like so many in our world today are dead. They're not abiding in the Father. And those will be pruned according to the words of our Father. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this root piece, I'm going to let him grow. And I'm going to let him get nice and strong. And then I'm going to take a piece of my tree that bears fruit, and I'm going to prune a limb, a branch off of him, and I'm going to graft him right there, right into that bud. And whenever I graft him in, I will then have another good quality bearing fruit tree, because I love my plants and I want what's best for them, and I want them to do their purpose. And in the same way, the Father says that he takes those whom he loves, the ones that bear fruit, and he prunes them so that they can bear more fruit. So I will likewise prune from my best tree. I will take a limb and I will prune it and I will graft it in right over there. So, today I hope that this helps you see what the parable of the vine and the branches is all about. It's about bearing fruit. It's about being obedient to the Father. It's about obeying his commands. Obeying the commands of the Lord. And we can know what those are. Jesus taught them. It is the Word of God. The Scriptures. Not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The commands of God. Deuteronomy 13 tells us that if any prophet teaches anything against the commands of God, that he is a false prophet. Not only did Jesus obey all the commands of his Father, just like he told us in the parable of the vine and the branches, but his commands are for us to abide and to be obedient to the commands of the Father as well. Thus, bearing fruit and showing to be his disciples. Whenever we do that, Jesus has then also turned around and he said, now I've commanded you, this is my commandment, and that is that you would love one another. That you would love one another. Because whenever we love one another, we encourage each other to bear fruit. I hope this guy helps you. I hope that this training teaches you something today about what Jesus taught, what Jesus actually lived, not just what we want to be. Guys, we need to be obedient to the Word. Whenever we do that, we can change the world. We can change the world one sip at a time. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, like, subscribe, share. Let's get the word out. Let's be the branches. Let's be fruit-bearing branches, y'all. I love y'all. Y'all have a blessed day. We'll see you.